The 5th South Africa Investment Conference kicks off today in Sandton. It's the final leg of the government's effort to attract 1.2 trillion rand in investments over the next 5 years. Well, this is what was said by the president. That was 4 years ago. Now, this conference brings together delegates from South Africa and the rest of the globe. So, what does South Africa have to offer to attract investment? Let's speak now to political risk analyst Marisa Lourenco, who speaks to us from Johannesburg. Marisa, good morning to you, and thank you for your time. South Africa's power crisis since that initial investment conference 4 years ago, it has worsened over time. And so what credible story is the president going to sell to leaders of business, not only domestic, but international?
So certainly the power crisis is going to be a very difficult topic to navigate. And I think that the president has already said that the initiatives to tackle it will be discussed at this conference, because it's just simply something that he cannot avoid. The one area, though, that relates to this, where South Africa could draw much more investment than it has in the past decade, is, of course, in the renewable energy sector. And we have seen foreign investors really coming strongly into the market this year. I think that we've seen about 2,500 megawatts signed in renewable energy projects in the first 3 months of this year alone, which is actually more than what was signed in the whole of last year. So that's one area where, the president has to speak about, look, there's a power crisis, but it's another area where he can put forward, look, South Africa's got a lot of potential. We haven't even begun to tap into all of it. So come forth with that. The market is open.
Yeah. Marisa, while I speak to you, you may not see it, but on our television screen is a live picture where the president is shaking hands with the possible investors to South Africa. And that leads me to my next question, that this year in particular, we shouldn't be talking as though South Africa is making this first step. This conference of this kind was done 4 years ago, and so what we need to look forward to is how much of the pledges have actually been monetized. Are we able to come to that?
Yeah, so I think it's been very difficult, because I think that as soon as Ramaphosa took office in 2018, he did make moves, to set up these kind of conferences to draw investors in. But investors have been quite wary, because we saw that things really slowed down during the Zuma years, which were 9 very, very long years. And I think critically what happened then, especially in the energy sector, not just the corruption that we saw really escalate at Eskom, but we saw renewable energy completely slow down. Now, investors did want to return to the market. They had a lot of faith in Cyril Ramaphosa and his business reform promises, but they were still a little bit wary, and they wanted to wait and see. Now, unfortunately, Ramaphosa has been quite slow with some of his reform efforts, and I think that, in the first term, a lot of his focus has also been on consolidating his power within the ANC. So the whole kind of business environment, we're still getting investment, but it has been slower than, we kind of wanted it to be.
Yeah.
I think one thing that South Africa does rest on a lot, though, is South Africa is still the most advanced economy in Africa. And I've said this before, that it's still the gateway to sub-Saharan Africa, despite all of its challenges. I think that sometimes South Africa does rest on that, in the sense of it feels, okay, look, even if, things are not going too well, we're still going to get investment because we're still the gateway. And I think that it really needs to change that, which is maybe why, going back to your question, is it seems like we keep starting from the beginning.
Yeah. As we wind down this conversation, which sectors of the economy then would you say have somewhat benefited from turning the pledges into actual money?
I mean, again, it's really renewable energy. And I think, South Africa also has critical minerals. So mining, even though it has gone through a bit of a dip, even though production has gone down in recent years, that is still a sector that will be quite strong. Renewable energy is really benefiting, because the renewable energy procurement plan that has actually been in government for over 10 years, that is really one that is seen favorably by investors, and it seems to be free from the kind of corruption that has plagued things like the car powership deal, Eskom, and all of that. So I think that's really the main area that government has to focus on. Tourism could pick up again. It's obviously dampened by global factors like inflation, lower consumer spending. But if we can start to bring up those sectors and just really focus on the sectors that investors will come to and not try to get in everything, I think that South Africa could at least be successful. Though at this point, I'm not sure that it will be able to raise US dollars. I'm not sure that it will be able to get that.
Yeah. Perhaps as a final question then, South Africa's foreign policy position, particularly on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that has been a big talking point. We've seen our Minister of DERCO going to explain this in foreign lands. Talk to us about whether that is going to play a factor here, and could we actually bring it to the finer detail of actually asking who the demographic profile of the business leaders that are going to be in Sandton this time around?
Yes, so I think that, when the Russia-Ukraine conflict first broke out and South Africa didn't take a side, I think it did that because there weren't really consequences for abstaining from the vote. But I think that now with Naledi Pandor's comments about Russia being a friend, I think that that's become quite problematic. I don't think that South Africa, the government in general, I don't think that it's in broad support of Russia. If we look at what happened when Ramaphosa came to office, ties with the West had really kind of been strained under the Zuma years, but he really focused on bringing those up. He wanted better ties with BRICS, but also to maintain those existing ties with the West and to improve them. And I think that that's still very important, because for all of the rhetoric that some members of government say, if we look at how the Ramaphosa administration has broadly behaved, it's not to cut off ties with the West. So I don't think that we necessarily need to be worried, but I do think that some assurance needs to be given that South Africa still values the US as one of its biggest trading partners alongside China.
Yeah. Let me just refine that final question. I think it was a bit clumsy. The question I want to put to you is, will the profile of the business leaders who are in attendance at this summit this time around be important to watch as to which country they come from, given this foreign policy position that we have taken? Or do you think that that's oversimplifying this matter?
No, I think that we're going to get a range of investors. South Africa, again, it's important to the West, it's important to China, it's important to a whole host of regions. So I don't think we're going to get, if I'm understanding your question properly, I don't think we're going to specifically get investors from just one part of the world. I think that we would get a variety, and I think that the way that our foreign trade works now, with the US and China as the biggest partners, I think that will stay, and I think that the European Union is going to get a lot more involved as well.
Right, that's Marisa Lourenco. She is a political risk analyst. Thank you very much for giving us some insights ahead of the big discussions that are going to be had at this investment conference.